Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Business of Fun podcast. It's me, Dave Wakeman. I am your host. My guest today is Amanda Lester. This is a great conversation about all things market research. If you don't learn something about market research from this conversation, you may never learn anything about market research from any conversation. It's very thorough. It's a really great, actionable podcast. It's awesome. But before I tell you about what Amanda and I were up to yesterday, check out my friends at Booking Protect, the global leaders in the refund protection. Tons of great stuff at bookingprotect.com. There has been some really great content about how to effectively use refund protection to protect your brand, increase customer service, all kinds of great stuff. You can check them out there, hook them up on LinkedIn, and give them a follow there, or follow them on Instagram where they post some really, really great photos. But the data on this thing is clearer than ever. Since venues have started to reopen after the lockdowns, people have been taking up refund protection at a great rate that is greater than ever before. It's some months, it'll vary like everything, but some months it'll be twice the rate that it was happening before. And it has stabilized at a rate that is much, much higher than previously seen. So check them out, bookingprotect.com. Talk to Haley, talk to Kat, talk to Kath, talk to Simon, talk to any of them. It's great people, great organization. Check out my website, davewakeman.com, where you can sign up for my newsletters, read some blog posts, check out the podcast, all that stuff. It's davewakeman.com. There's a little link that'll pop up. It'll tell you, get the newsletter. Then you can get talking tickets or the business value. Go there. There will be some new dates for workshops on market research and pricing that I'm putting together for later in the year. And just get a good look at the Dave Wakeman website, because I'm still very proud of the work that my designer did on it. So check that out. Back to Amanda Lester, though. Amanda is a really great guest. I was so thrilled to have the chance to talk to her, because we talked about two things that are super, super important now, market research and audience development. And Amanda has what she describes as a different approach to research, where she almost always drives things towards an actionable insight. And she feels that people get to their research much too late, which is something I agree with as well. Another really cool idea that she talks about is the idea of being a hypothesis-driven organization. It means that you're driven by questions and guesses about what drives people to act, what you're trying to solve for, and what you're trying to see from the market. So it's a really cool idea that she talks about. We talk about a social media experiment that she's done to identify how arts organizations are using social media. We talked about how anybody can start doing market research now. We talk about how to do market research, how to find a champion or create champions in your organization. We talk about what it means to do not enough research or too much. We talk about loyalists. We talk about pricing research. And we hit on audience development. So this is a really, really, really great conversation. I learned a lot. So I'm hoping that you will as well. So here's my conversation with Amanda Lester on the Business of Fun. I want to welcome Amanda Lester to the Business of Fun podcast. Amanda, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, this is going to be great. I have suckered you into talking to me today about two things that I think are very, very timely and important. Probably they're always timely and important, but they keep gaining importance because of the ongoing nature of the pandemic despite it being the YOLO wave now, it's still impacting people. It is changing people's behavior, and who knows what it's doing to people health-wise, but it's still going on. And that's market research and audience development. So I think this is going to be awesome. I totally think that you have some ideas I think that are super awesome, and I'm excited to talk to you.
Me too. Thank you.
I'm looking at my notes here, so don't, like, if I stutter, it's just because I'm looking at the notes, and I'm totally tough on people, and so I want to start out this conversation because I talk about market research quite a bit, and I'm always curious about understanding people's philosophy behind how they do market research, and I think you have a slightly different way of thinking through market research than I do. So I'd be curious if you could tell us a little bit about how you approach research.
Sure, of course. So I just to start with my background because I think that that plays into this philosophy that I have. So I started as a classical musician, trained classically. I then went into arts administration at the LA Phil, doing marketing and audience development and insights. And now I'm working as a researcher in media and entertainment. And something that I've observed over my time in arts administration, especially, is that many of these organizations are not doing enough research, so they need to do more. They need to do it more frequently. They need to do it more consistently, and I think that they need to do it earlier in the process. So I think that the barriers that I've observed, at least, that's stopping these organizations from doing enough research is the obvious ones: lack of time and lack of budget. But I don't think that those are really excuses anymore with the technology that we have access to these days in the research world. We have audience insights at our fingertips all the time. And so the only thing left that I think is really standing in the way of what people in this industry call actionable insights, I think that's timing. From what I've experienced, and other people may have had different experiences, but in my experience, I think that these research studies that are happening are taking place too late. So they're taking place, they take some time to work through, you come up with insights, and at that point, the decisions have already been made and people have moved on, and there's no room to change or for these insights to inform what you're doing. So you end up waiting a year or maybe 2 years, and you hope that there's going to be another opportunity for you to implement and apply these insights. But by that time, they might not even be relevant anymore, and you need to do more research. So what I think, and this is my philosophy, and I think that these organizations should be doing much more of this, is doing research very early on in the process as you're developing programming, as you're thinking about concepts, as you're thinking about new ticketing offers and structures. This all needs to happen very early. And some examples that I like to give are, so I work in the media and entertainment space right now. And, movie studios, do they release movies or TV shows before testing them? The answer is no, very, very rarely. They test almost all of them. And then you think about a Fortune 500 company. Would they launch a major advertising campaign without testing it first? Probably not. There's too much at stake. And then you also think about, that same company, would they release a new website or a new app without testing it first? And that answer is absolutely not. And yet this is happening all the time in the entertainment industry, right?
Yes. Oh no, you're absolutely right. I don't know if you've actually if you'll know this example or not, but or if I'm sure you do. Famously people try to roll out the idea, oh, Steve Jobs never did market research, which is completely false, because all you got to do is go to the records from their lawsuit with Samsung, I believe it was, and they did more market research than anybody. And so, like, don't come in here with the Steve Jobs defense, because we will swat it out of here. So when you talk, but that leads me to another question. So how early, when you say people are doing it too late, how early should people be starting their research?
So just using the arts as an example, since that's the background I come from, I think that, when programmers and marketing teams are thinking about concepts for their upcoming season, so this can happen a couple of years in advance, right? They're thinking about tentpole themes. I think that they should be doing concept testing with those. And then, as they start developing further, they have the programming starting to get locked in before they start creating their advertising campaigns, their subscription campaign materials, their messaging and imagery. They should be testing those. And this should all happen in a couple of years leading up to a season.
Yeah. And would it be accurate? And if I'm putting words in your mouth, you can go ahead and just say, Dave, you're a numpty, and everybody will completely agree with you, and it will be a totally appropriate response. But it's never too early to really start understanding your market, right? And you should probably, if I'm not mistaken in your answer, never really stop talking to your market.
Yes, 100%. It's never too early, and you should never stop talking to them. Yes, that's
Every now and then I'm
perfect.
right. Every now and then I totally nail something. This is good. This made my day. Now, so then that brings me to the the lack of time and the lack of budget argument that you say people have all the time. Um, and I know that probably as soon as we post this episode, people are going to come and they'll say, "Oh, it still doesn't apply to me." So I want to knock down this idea before, because we were talking about some ideas and ways that you can do that even before we started recording. When people bring lack of time or lack of budget to you, how do you tell people to approach this? Because I know that those shouldn't exist either.
Right. Well, just from my perspective, I've seen lots of tools that are being developed over the years that, traditional research, yes, has been very time consuming and costs a lot. But there are new tools these days, like you were talking about big data earlier. There's that, but there's also ways to literally have Zoom conversations with your audience members. When you're thinking about early research, and as long as you're doing it often enough, you can bring down the scale a bit, and that makes things much more accessible cost-wise and time-wise. So as long as you're doing occasional big research projects to really get the whole picture, I think that you can also drop in at certain moments before as you're creating your ads or as you're creating your messaging. You can test those with small groups of people. You can have a few conversations with audience members and run these things by them. And as long as you're understanding that, yes, you're only talking to a few people and you have to take everything with a grain of salt, I think it's completely valuable to get their input at every stage. So I think, thinking about scale and bringing that down a bit, and then just leveraging all of this online technology that we have now.
Yeah. I'm probably going to frame or ask this question. It probably is. I'm not going to do a good job at asking this question, is what I think is going to happen, because it's going to be hard for me to put into words what I think is a simple concept for us, but it might not be simple for people who are struggling with research or like trying to get buy-in on it. But you talked about using Zoom to talk with just individual audience members. Do you have a way that you talk to people about the progression? Where do you start, and then like where does it end? And is that like with small groups, and then it leads to when you do a big research project, or how do you talk to people about this continuum of research?
Mm-hmm. I think it depends on your goals. Market research tends to be highly customized, and that's because there are different methodologies that are more effective at getting insights when you have different objectives. So I think it really depends, unfortunately. But I think using smaller scale research and using that as a case study and showing the results can be really effective at getting buy-in for more research. And something that I heard recently is that the ROI for research is enormous. It is one of the most high ROI things that your organization can invest in. And that's because these insights are really they should be informing all parts of your operation. And it really helps you connect with people. So I think using small scale research to show the value can be really effective. And I think, it depends on, you really need a champion internally at your organization who will help make the case, but also once the research is finished, make sure that it's filtering out to everyone so that people know about it, are aware of it, and then can apply it. So those would be my two things there.
So that's interesting. You need a champion. And I'm curious, how do you gain a champion in an organization? Because you were talking about market research and building new websites. And I, of course, did a bunch of research before I built my new website. And what I found was that there's this just incredible amount of distrust of the marketing function in most organizations. And it's, I think, partly because it's too tactified, right? Like the people don't understand what marketing strategy means, and that you have to put strategy before tactics. So then it makes it much more challenging. Actually, let me give you the full thought before I go ahead and jump into the question.
Mm-hmm.
Part of that is also because marketing has become tactified. It's become the communications department and less about driving revenue. And I think that combination of those two ideas has made it much more difficult for people to go to the executives or the board or anybody to gain buy-in on research. So how do you talk about getting a champion, or is the premise of my question completely false through your work?
I don't think it's false at all. I think you're right. It can be hard to find a champion and to help them see the value. In my experience, when people observe qualitative research, that's the most powerful way for people to become champions, because they are hearing audiences, customers, in their own words, watching their emotions, watching the passion, and basically hearing the voice of the customer for themselves. That's the most powerful thing. So if you are doing interviews, if you're doing focus groups, have people observe. Really encourage that. So that would be a big thing for finding a champion. As far as getting buy-in, can you repeat the first question again?
I jammed you up. That's okay. So, well, the idea of really just gaining a champion, that was what the question was about, and it's like, how do you go about teaching people to do that? Because, and then I went off on my own little soliloquy about like all the research I did, but which the correct answer to the first question would have been like, your research is not completely bogus. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just curious about how you actually, you talk to somebody to gain those champions, and qualitative data, like you said, is incredibly powerful because, it is the real voice, right? So, but I guess to go further on that is, what are additional steps we can take?
That's a great question. Something that, and I don't know if this will connect as well as it is for me, but I actually wonder about using the term market research. And there is a lot of debate, I think, in the research world about the right terminology. And I think that pigeonholes what this can be used for, what research can be valuable for. So, I don't necessarily have a preferred term, but when I was at the LA Phil, for example, I was providing insights for far beyond the marketing department. I was working with philanthropy, I was working with education, I was working with artistic team. So this doesn't just have to be about prices and tickets, although that is certainly an important part of it. But I think just showing that insights can be of value for the organization at large is really important. It's not just about marketing. It's not just about communication and messaging. That is a huge part of it, absolutely. But there's so much more that you can gain from insights.
Yeah, and for how successful I am at doing this is up for debate. But my overriding theme and argument is that everything you do is marketing, and therefore this research pays off, like you said, in philanthropy. It pays off in programming. It pays off in pricing, which we'll get to in a second, because you opened the door. Now we're gonna talk about this, because people try to tell me you can't research price, and I tell them that I say they're morons for it very often, because it's like an excuse to not do your job is really what it is. But it's super helpful, and I'm just curious though about the idea of champions and like building these things up and gaining actual insights, because it's again, you talked about how before we started recording, I talked about big data and and I should use air quotes here, big data, because it's like always like we have all this data, we don't ever use it in a way that makes any kind of sense for how our business operates. When you are going to get this champion. And you and I get it. We completely understand that like marketing's everything, or at least I think marketing's the entire everything you do, right? Okay, good. I didn't want to put words in your mouth.
I agree.
If something's stupid, it's always fine to say that. Dave said that he's stupid, and it's totally appropriate because I would agree. But when marketing's everything, how do you how what are some of the barriers to overcome for that? Because like I think having a champion's great, but then like you talk to the operations department, right? Or you talk to your IT department, they're going to be like, that's ridiculous. So then how do you continue to push it? Maybe when there's a resistance because there are people who don't have that sort of understanding or belief in the power of research. Because I think if I'm not misreading your work and not misreading the conversation we're having, and again, I agree with you. So this is not me putting anything except for my impression on this, is that research has the power and the capability to change an organization. It has a chance to overcome every barrier that you face, every issue that might be raised, every problem that you could have. You can figure it out by research because people tell you what they think and what they want. If all you do is ask and you shut up, which I haven't done a very good job of. So now I'm going to ask and shut up.
No, I think that's an excellent question. And I think I have two answers to that. So the first is, based on my experience, I think you need to get everyone who you possibly can in the organization involved in the research from the beginning. So when I was doing some research at the LA Phil, for example, it might be surprising to hear this, but at that point we were cash strapped. It was the middle of the pandemic. We were trying to understand where people's heads were at, and we needed to do it quickly, and we needed to do it very inexpensively. And I realized, we have customer service representatives who know our audiences very well, are great at talking to people. And so I roped them in very nicely into helping me recruit for some qualitative research. And they did an amazing job. They were so good at it, and they enjoyed it so much. And they wanted to know, what were the results? We would love to hear. And they just caught on to the research idea so quickly and with so much enthusiasm that, I sort of had an epiphany. Like, we have all of these human resources who are so passionate about this. Give them the chance to get involved in some way, and that will create buy-in. So that's number one. Number two is sort of like we were talking about earlier, that there's not enough research happening, and it's not happening all the time like it should be. But I think that we need to start building research into our processes so that it's never a question of, oh, should we do some research? It should be part of the process. So if you go back to, I was using movies as an example, where at my work, we're testing movies, we're testing TV shows, and we're doing that in a sort of iterative process. It is assumed that you're going to test your movie and that you're going to take audience feedback into account. And that is just the way it is done. And I think that that's sort of, we need to change our mindset, and research just has to be built in to the process. And that will also help with the timing issue, I think.
Yeah, I think that's awesome because I have been working on a couple of big research projects, and the more you get people involved, the better the whole thing goes, because people want to, they want to know what's going on, right? And that's sure. Awesome. They will give you everything because because you feel, they feel listened to. And then and this is where the question comes. And then it's like, because you're talking to customer service, they direct line to the customer. And so then my question then here is, because one of the challenges that I deal with a lot, and it's unfortunate, is getting executives to always pay attention to the people who are the front line with the customer, because there's a broken link between the two sides. And it's unfortunate because, most of the time it's dude that's saying this is going like, oh man, I know exactly what the customer wants. I'm going to totally tell you. And it's often completely wrong from what people really are buying or want or doing.
Mm-hmm.
How do you bridge that disconnect between the front line and the C-suite or the executives? You know, VPs. We'll capture everybody. The board, because I've sit on boards and sometimes the board doesn't want to talk to the to the customers. I'm like, oh, geez, please help me.
That definitely resonates. That is a big challenge. And you know, I think it all goes back to some of the things that, you know, we were talking about earlier about people relying on their assumptions rather than hypotheses, which is something I like to think of. And sort of what you were talking, I think, before we started about people are so, it can be such an insular community, whichever sort of type of organization you're in, that you sort of lose touch with the customer. And like you said, frontline people tend to be closer just in general, and so they have a better understanding. You know, I think I would go back here again to, especially with qualitative research. With quantitative, it's a little harder because you're just looking at numbers, and it's not as powerful emotionally. But I think getting I wouldn't say video testimonials, but doing focus groups or interviews and getting clips on video and showing highlight reels maybe to your executives so that they can see and hear the customers in their own words. That I think would really help and help them realize where the customer's head is at. And, you know, even better is if you can get them to actually sit and observe. And that's one of the difficulties these days, especially with more online research, is getting people's full attention, even the observers. You need to get people to really disconnect, say, I'm going to be out for a few hours because I'm doing this and this is important work. And you need their full attention, because if you know, they're trying to answer emails, it's not going to work. So I would go back to seeing and hearing the customers in person. And then once they start understanding how much value there is in that feedback and really starting to get a sense of where people are, then I think that they will be more open to hearing what the customer service reps have to say and the frontline workers.
Yeah. I'm going to use a word I think I'm pretty sure you know. The audience, the people listening may not know this word, but ethnography, right? And that's really what you're describing is like we're trying to get people to do ethnographic research. And one of the big challenges that I struggle with is even, you know, when you're dealing with somebody in sports or in theater or in the arts, is like talking to an executive or somebody on the board and go through the event like a customer, like from where you have to buy the ticket to how you get to the building to all these things. And then I want you to come back to me and tell me how your experience was. And then I turn it around and go, hey, now how would you feel if that was your experience? Because it's almost entirely different than people imagine. They again, it's an idea. It's not real. It's conceptual, and because it's conceptual, it's not that big a deal, right? Because it's just, you know, and so how do you get people to do that? Because I think it's a really, really powerful thing, right? It's like, you know, not just the Zoom, because the digital stuff is like, it's great, but there's nothing like, you know, you being there and going and sitting in the 10th, you know, or not even the 10th row center, because you know that's going to be there. How about you go sit in the balcony and see what that experience is like, and they'll give you a different perspective. You know, do you have success with getting people to do that? And I know with like movies, it's probably a little easier because there's just a culture about that, of like going to the theater and going around that. But in your work in the arts and everything, you know, how successful or, you know, transformative have you seen stuff like that become?
You know, I haven't seen much of that done in our world, unfortunately. But I think that that's an
very similar,
incredible idea. But you know what I think is especially important about it is not just going to sit in the balcony and listen to the concert, but to, like you said, go through the entire process of choosing a concert, buying your ticket, maybe trying to exchange it, going, parking or taking public transportation like an audience member would, having to deal with all of the pre and post experiences, elements, because that has such a huge impact on how people feel and whether or not they come back. And that's often the part that I think is missed. So I would 100% agree with you. I think you have to convince them to take the risk. And then once they do it, I think that they will get on board, because I think, like you said, it's such a powerful experience to do that in person. Another thing that I've heard of happening a bit is having an executive do a frontline worker's role for a little while. So have them sort of like switch places with them and experience talking to the customers, helping them get through issues themselves, so that then they're really having to, they're learning what are the barriers, what are the challenges, what are the pain points, and then they're having to try to figure out how to solve them. And I think that'll also bring issues up the ladder a bit.
Yeah, no, I definitely think, like, if you put your executive director or your marketing director behind the bar during intermission, it'll change their entire opinion on whether or not you need another box office window open or another bartender. And
it's another kind of ethnography, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But it's super important because, again, if you just look at the number, you're like going, oh, well, that's going to cost like $100 or something, or like $500, and then you realize, like, going, hey, look, it improves the customer's experience, and it probably ends up paying for itself too. So don't be ridiculous as far as that goes. I mean, typically better customer service pays for itself over and over and over again, just like good market research does. Which, because you talked about this thing going through the whole process, and you brought up the idea of the post event process too, I wanted to come back to this idea of building in research into the process, because I find that one of the things that really people miss is that they don't follow up, or they don't follow up effectively. And so you miss a lot of lessons, right? Right after an event, if you follow, I am a big user of Net Promoter Score, only because it's very simple and it's easy to get quantitative and qualitative information. And I use 3 questions. You can only use the magic question. How do you build it into the process, though, from your point of view? What would a successful post-event or process look like, where you built research into into the whole organization? Again, right. My question asking sometimes is not the greatest here, so.
No, I get it. That's a great question.
Convoluted is what we'll call it.
And okay, so I think that from what I've seen, a lot of organizations try to do some follow-up. And I'll start with what I think doesn't work. Long surveys don't work. It needs to be short, like yours. 3 questions, probably max. So that's a big one. Keep it short. Secondly, I think that a lot of times those who are doing post-concert or post-event research, they don't really know what they're going to do with the information that they gather. They just collect it, and it sort of gathers dust. And maybe they look at it at the end of the season, maybe not, but it doesn't really go anywhere. And so I think you really have to go into a post-event research project over multiple events with a really clear idea of your goals and what you are going to do with the data. And so, something that I think is really important is socializing the insights, socializing the data that you collect. If it just stays with one person, or even just within the marketing department, then it's probably not going to be successful. It's not going to stick. So I think those are two really, really big things that you need to consider before you start doing this, or as you're maybe updating your post-event research projects. Yeah. So
when you say socialize the insights, does that mean internal and external, or just internal?
Internal. I would say internal. But, since you bring that up, I think that in my experience with performing arts, I think probably with sports and theater too, these audiences are incredibly passionate. I mean, especially when you're talking about your most loyal, but even people who just had a wonderful experience at their first time. And oftentimes I've seen they want to know the results. They want to know what people think, and they want to know what you're going to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's often a hesitancy to share some of these insights with your audience and say, you told us this, and so here's how we're going to respond, because we want to listen to you, and we value your insight, we value your feedback. And I think that we need to be a little bit more transparent about the feedback that we're getting and what we're going to do about it, because I think that builds trust, that builds loyalty, that builds engagement with your audiences. And sorry to go back to something, but I was thinking more about your question about getting buy-in from executives, and I think sort of what I think sums it up well is we have to market our research to the internal organization. And as we know, as marketers, we need to generate an emotional connection with our executives. We need them to feel something. We need them to connect with a human story that conveys the insights and the data. So I think that's really the key is making them feel something. That's where the power comes in.
And you would think that would come natural, or it would seem natural.
You would think.
Not come naturally, because I think telling a story that emotionally resonates with people is hard work. So I don't want to say but you would think that would be something that people were aware of, is that these emotional, because of the nature of the business. But it's often missed.
We all have work to do.
Yeah, well, yeah, myself included. Now I will say this, because you talked about I need to publicize my your successes, and people want to know, and there'll be a question here, but this will be like, I'm going to humble brag here, because I do my NPS score probably at least twice a year, if not 3 times a year, and the last time I got 100, which was pretty amazing, because it had always been a tremendously high for the newsletter and podcast. Before it was 70, like 70, 65, 70. It's always been above 50. So it's great. But people want to know what I found out. They love to find out the insights, and what issues are people dealing with? What stories do people, like it when I cover? What guests are doing well? All of these things. It's pretty good. So it's pretty exciting, and I'm never going to run another survey, because I'm going to just go out on top on the surveys, because now I can only go down.
Yeah. Gotta keep your 100.
Exactly. My NPS score of 100 is staying clear. But what I wanted to ask, though, is because you talked about how rabid and how emotionally engaged the fans are for these things. And one of the challenges now, as whatever stage and whatever wave of the pandemic we're dealing with, is there's always this idea that if I just engage the people who are super passionate, that are already my fans, then I'm going to be totally fine. And I think that, and I don't know your opinion on this, but I'll be curious. You always need to be fighting to get more, expand your reach and expand your audience. How does this how do you convey that to people, right? Because it's a struggle, because people feel like, oh, I just need to get more people, the more of the people I already have to come more often, which may or may not be possible. And then you end up like the Ehrenberg Bass Institute in South Australia did some really great research. This showed, and this was B2B, that 95% of your potential target market's not even in the market for what you're selling at this time. Mm-hmm. And you realize that there's a much larger addressable audience than you could possibly realize, and most people are ignoring it. So how do you bring that across to people? Because that's if you address those people, it would be a huge opportunity, and people miss the opportunity all the time. At least from where I'm sitting. I don't know about you. You may have
from where I'm sitting, I agree. I think it is a huge missed opportunity, and I think there are some reasons behind why we only market to our loyalists, and some of them are obvious. It's easier. They're already listening to us. It's easier to convert them to purchases. So I don't want to say that we're just being lazy, because I don't think that's all of it. I think it's part of it. It feels efficient to us, but then someday we're going to run out of those people, and we're not going to be able to scale. Some of the other reasons that I think are less obvious, and this might be a bit controversial to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think that we are sometimes afraid of what other people are going to say, and that we're not asking the right questions of them anyway. I think that we may not want to hear some of the things that they have to say about the kind of experiences that we offer. And so I think there's a certain amount of bravery that has to come into it. You have to be willing to hear things that may challenge your assumptions. They may challenge your personal opinions and feelings about the entertainment that you present. And you have to be okay with hearing that is someone else's point of view, and it's valid too. So I think that's also a big one. We need to be brave. I think it's also, it's hard to find people. It's expensive to find people who will talk to you who are not your loyalists. And I think that at least in my experience, in arts organizations, has been a big barrier. It's intimidating to try. How do we find those people? How do we get them to talk to us? So I think that there's some work to do there, and looking maybe to some for-profits and how they're doing that kind of research. And it also requires investment. So it's like you said, you know, in order to do that kind of research, you have to have buy-in, and you need the funds to be able to get those people to talk to you. And that actually brings something else up that I think is related, and it's a big theme in the research community that I'm sure you know about, that is respecting your respondents. So these people, especially in my experience with arts organizations, and you're talking to your loyalists and you're talking to some high potentials, you need to make it valuable for them too. And part of that is maybe sharing a bit of information on your findings with them because they're interested. Part of them is rewarding them, incentivizing them, and respecting that they deserve that for giving you their time and opinion. And I think that is, it's easier not to do that with your loyalists. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to talking to your high potentials and even people who aren't even on your radar, you need to make it worth their while. Mm-hmm. And that is how you get people to talk to you. And they'll respect that you value their time.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've said that, like, if we're going to invite people to do something, like if we're going to have a little focus group or we're going to do this, we got to give them something. Yes. And people are like, yes. Well, won't they just answer the thing? I go, no, they won't. I go, it went, and again, we'll use my experience because we can talk about it without a filter, right? And it's, so if I put a survey in my newsletter or in the show notes for the podcast that has an incentive, right? Like I'll give away a $25 gift card to Amazon. It doesn't have to be a lot. Mm-hmm. People are like much more likely to respond to this. Or if I say I'm going to send them a copy of of a favorite book that I've been reading that's like about, strategy or marketing or something, the response rate increases. It's a sign of respect. Like you said, it's completely, it's not even about the gift. It's about the acknowledgement that like your opinion matters. You are, I value what you're going to tell me, because again, most of the time you do a survey, you do some research. It's easy for people to feel like this is fine. Like, I could do it. I could not. They don't care. Right, because you never see the actual impact, the results. Right. especially if you don't see the impact and the results. It's very, very, very difficult to bring it across to people. Now, in a second, I'm going to ask you about a cool project you're doing, but I have one more question I want to ask because I kind of tipped it earlier on pricing, right? And because we've been talking about the research after the fact and talking to loyalists and talking to people who are high potential. What role does pricing play in all of this? And I know that it's as far as ROI, if you can move that pricing button, that's the most important move you can make, because for every 1% of price you increase, you get 11% in profit. And I don't know any arts or I don't really know any business that can turn down a 10 or 11% uptick in profit. But a lot of people push back on me because I talk about pricing all the time. Most of the time, it becomes in my famous phrase, discounts are for dummies. But how do you talk to people about pricing research? Because I think people misunderstand it maybe they don't misunderstand it when I talk about it, but they misunderstand how you can do pricing research.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my experience, well, first I'll just say, yes, you should absolutely research pricing before setting prices or increasing prices or doing big discount campaigns. I do think you should do some research around it. It's such a big risk for your organization, which way you go. In my experience, I've worked on pricing projects where we use conjoint analysis. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where you're asking respondents to choose between different sort of packages. You could think of them as. So each of them has a certain elements in them that have a price attached, and as they choose the different packages that they are most attracted to, you start to understand what do they value the most, that is within, what are the elements that they value the most and that most drive intent to purchase. So I think that's a really good tool. I think that, you have to take, even though you should be doing market research around pricing, you do have to take everything with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, they're probably just answering a survey or talking to you, and they're not actually buying something.
Right.
It's different when it's imaginary versus when they are actually putting down money. So something else, though, that I would add, and this is less to do with research than with sort of audience development and marketing around pricing, is for audiences, from what I've heard from them, a lot of this is about risk. The money that they're putting down to attend your experience is a risk for them, because they don't know really if they're going to enjoy themselves, if it's going to be a dud, if they're going to be bored, if they're going to love the music or if they're going to hate it, if their team is going to win or lose. Mm-hmm. And so I think what you have to do is you have to start thinking about, how do you minimize the sense of risk? And so, I think what that sort of boils down to, if you can find enough ways to connect with them to minimize their sense of risk, the pricing is less important, like whatever you set the price as. Because if they feel like they are confident they're going to get the value for that price, that's really what matters. They need to trust that no matter what, they're going to have an experience that was worth it. Yeah, so that's sort of my take on it.
If I could just convince people to put on the lens or the hat of thinking through the value that someone is going to receive from a product, a service, an event, I think that it would clear up. It wouldn't clear up everything, but it would start people on a path that would clear up a lot of the sort of big hairy problems that people are dealing with, because it's often too easy to look at it just from your point of view, right? So you're doing the research or you're setting the price because I need to hit this budget number, or I need to sell this number of tickets, or I need to do this, or I need to do that, as opposed to like, what is the customer going to get from this? How is this going to improve their life, right? Like we both know Ruth Hart, and like Ruth was talking about jobs to be done, and it's really, really like an incredible way of looking at it, because people are coming to us for market research. They want to make more money, right? Right, for strategy work, they want to make more money. They come to us because they want to make more money. Okay, but like they come to an arts organization because maybe they need a special event with their loved ones, right? Or they want to entertain a new business associate, or they're trying to maybe take somebody through an interview process and they want to see how they react in a social setting. And there's all these different things, and if you understand it, it becomes more valuable, more, more impactful. And it becomes, like you said, the price becomes less of a point, because price, in my research and in the work I've done, I've always found that it's a knee-jerk response. It's a knee-jerk objection, because it reflects the fact that people don't see the value that you're asking
Right.
them to give in dollars. But that's my stance on all of this. But I want to ask you about your tracker, your social media tracker, because you've been running this cool thing that I was looking at, actually when you mentioned it to us when we were getting on here. I was just looking at it and how you've been tracking. It's a social media experiment, but arts and entertainment organizations and how well they're doing on different. I was looking at the Instagram numbers in the top five. My favorite, the New York Philharmonic was like number 2 or number 3. So can you tell us a little bit about this? Because I do think that this stuff is kind of cool to look at, and you can see how people use social media and what makes an effective campaign.
Sure. Well, I mean, to start with, so from what I've heard and from what I've experienced, digital communications is such a big challenge for arts organizations and probably for other types of organizations. We just haven't figured out, it's a puzzle and we haven't figured it out yet. And so I'm really hoping that this project can help us sort of cooperate to try to figure out what is the best way to use digital media and social media to engage with audiences and to get them to interact with us. So what I did was I started thinking about, social media engagement for orchestras, because that's my background. And when I was working at an orchestra, we tracked our own performance. And I think most organizations track their own performance, and they track it against previous performance that they did. So it's always sort of within a vacuum of their own past performance. And I think that there's definitely things you can learn there. Don't stop doing that. But I think that we're missing a big part of the picture in not looking at the context. What are other orchestras doing? What are other arts organizations doing? What are other cultural organizations doing? Because we're competing for views and engagement with them. So I thought it would be interesting, and this was just, I started for fun out of my curiosity, to stack the orchestras up against each other. So I chose 21 orchestras that I was interested in, and I pulled a bunch of publicly available data from their social media pages, and I ranked them by interactions on their social media posts per month, video views per month, follower count. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I think I'm going to track it month over month. And that has been incredibly interesting to see how the rankings are moving and shifting depending on what they're posting in a given month. And so, this is an experiment for now. I've gotten quite a bit of interest from orchestra administrators who are, this is interesting data to see that I don't think that they've really had access to before. And so, for now it's phase 1, but I'm thinking about other ways to expand it and how to, for right now it's just a spreadsheet. But what I'd really like to do is make it more visual and start sharing more detailed insights based on the data, because I think that I've barely scratched the surface of what is there. And I'm really hoping that what we can all learn from this project will help all of us improve on social media.
Yeah. And I would say that the one thing too, just because and you tell me if I'm wrong here, is like you talked about all the context matters, but don't just limit it to who you think your direct competition is. Like go outside of that, because that's super important. And it's if we're talking market research, which we've been doing for about an hour now, you have to know who your competition is, like who is fighting for the attention that you want as well. And but I think the thing is cool because it reminded me of this thing I did during when lockdowns first started about brand tracking for different, it started out as sports because I was just it was easy for me to find that data, right? Because it was all publicly available data. And it was it was amazing to see what was happening. And it was amazing to see depending on winning and losing or player signings, how much a brand would move and shift in these different numbers. And it was pretty, it's exactly a pretty
right.
Cool project that you're doing, and I would tell people to give it a look. Where can people find the tracker? They can find you. Where do you want to point people towards today?
People can check out my LinkedIn page. I'm posting regular updates each month with some tidbits of insights along with the updated rankings. So you can check those out on my LinkedIn page. That's the best place to go for now. I'm planning to eventually start sharing more information on a blog and website. So there's going to be more to come there. But for now, that's the best place to go. But I 100% agree with you. Don't make the mistake of only looking at the people who seem like they're your type of organization. They're your peers. That's not your only competition.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I did exactly this for somebody I'm working with, and I was like going, here's all I can fit on one PowerPoint slide.
Right.
This is the competition. So it's very interesting to map that out. Amanda, I want to thank you for doing this, having a conversation with me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This was great. A lot of fun.
What did you think about my conversation with Amanda Lester? Let me know by sending me an email at my name, Dave@DaveWakeman.com. Make sure you check out my website. It is DaveWakeman.com. There you can get the Talking Tickets newsletter, the Business of Value, all the stuff I do. There is a link. You just drop your email in the box and you will start getting stuff from me. There will be some new workshop dates coming up. There'll be all kinds of great stuff there. Blog posts, all kinds of stuff. So check it out, DaveWakeman.com. If you like this podcast, make sure you share it with somebody. Subscribe or rate this thing. I love all of those things, and I appreciate your feedback. If you are in the market or you have been thinking about refund protection, which you should have, because concern for whether or not a show will go on or whether or not somebody's going to be able to go to a show, it's still there, peeking at the back of people's mind. And Booking Protect has the data to show that people are looking for that peace of mind more than ever. But it's not just about giving people the peace of mind. It is an opportunity to improve your brand, offer a different level of customer service, and give people just more control on their purchase path. People are often looking for things that they might not know they want, and they might not know they want refund protection until it's offered to them. So check out my friends at bookingprotect.com. Talk to Kat, Kath, Haley, anyone on the team. They're all great. They provide a great service. They have been great friends to the podcast and the newsletter since these things started. This is also, I should add, the 4th anniversary of the Business of Fun podcast. So happy birthday to me, even though I think I said it on the last one too. So still, happy birthday to me. As we head into the summer, we've hit another wave of the COVID. I know it is still incredibly tough for people out there. If you need someone to talk to, if you're just feeling stressed out and you want to bounce some ideas off of someone, if you're just whatever it is, send me a note, Dave@DaveWakeman.com, and we can have a chat. I'm happy to chat with anybody because I know how difficult some days can be, struggling through some of these challenges that we're still dealing with. So send me a note. I'm happy to talk with you. Even if it's just to crack a couple really awful dad jokes, I'll do it. I'll do what I have to because I'm so grateful for everybody listening, sharing, subscribing, and just being here for me. So thank you again, and I will talk to y'all soon.